Staurogyne Repens, or Staurogyne Repens, often referred to as S. Repens, which I find a little bit odd. Why does everyone call it S. Repens? I'm not sure. It's something that has been boggling my mind for a few years now, as this is a plant from South America, from the Amazon, and it's been around for a long time. I've had a lot of experience with this plant, and here's one of the biggest issues that I always encounter, and that's neglect. When I neglect this plant for a good amount of time, eventually it has a tendency to sort of stifle out the relationship between the substrate and the plant itself. It does spread, it does look pretty cool, but you do end up with a bunch of hair algae growing underneath the healthy plant. So my biggest recommendation to people out there would be to treat this more like a stem plant than a carpeting plant, and continue to trim the tops and kind of pull the old root system out and replant the tops. Now, that seems laborious, and I admit that I don't get around to doing it as often as I should, and maybe I should make a mental note to do this more often. Now, I got to this point in my 150 and needed to make some changes, so I went ahead and I pulled out the whole entire carpet out and put it in a bucket for holding. I used tank water from the tank and just left it in the water in the meantime. In my experience, I found this to be not that big of a deal. More often than not, just come back a day or two later and the plant's fine. Now, something happened in my situation, and it basically turned into compost over a very short period of time. So there was only a few stems left, and I went ahead and planted those in. But I was really short for this aquarium here. So sometimes you have to call in the cavalry. You have to call in the troops. Big thanks to Aquarium Co-op for having some in stock. So I went up and grabbed 6 of their grab bag pots, the pots that are, they got damaged in shipping or something like that. And so I went up and grabbed those. So we'll be on track fairly soon. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a breakdown of how to unplant it. Basically, just yank it all out, get the roots out of there, and clean it up. This is all that was left. This is all that remained. After all the plants that were in there, this was all that was left. So, a little bit of a disaster, but do not despair. The Aquarium Co-op to the rescue. As I mentioned, I got their bargain bin Staurogyne to kind of replenish a little bit quicker than it was going to take otherwise. Unpotting Staurogyne Repens is probably one of the easier plants out there. You're probably going to get about 9 to 12 stems, something like that, per pot. So I would take that into consideration of how big your tank is. Mine's 150 gallons, so I got 6. If you're one of those lucky people that happens to be local, from time to time there does happen to be some bargain plants at the Aquarium Co-op, and sometimes they're also running sales and things like that. So always keep appraised of their website and see what's happening, and I'm sure this is something that can work out for you. I've heard hundreds of reports of people getting them shipped out from the Aquarium Co-op, so I'm confident that they'll definitely take care of you if that's the route you gotta go. Now, this material that's in here is what's called rock wool. It's actually an old insulation that was designed for steam engines originally. So it's not something that's really going to do harm to your aquarium, but it's also not something that's going to be a benefit. So I don't recommend putting it into aquariums a lot. There are other people out there that say, it's fine, you can add it in there. But I also don't go super crazy about removing it and getting every tiny little fiber out. I'm also not concerned in that direction. As you can see, the individual stems are pretty easy to sort through, get out of the rock wool, and discard that, basically the trash that's left over. As I mentioned, these were kind of in the damaged plant bin. Probably something happened to them during shipping or something like that, and they're still really good quality. So, very happy with that. And it's definitely, this is a good starter stem plant for somebody to work with, and work on your planting technique and stuff like that before you move on to things like HC and stuff like that with the real tiny root system. So, this is something that I always kind of mention to people that, like, oh, here's something that you could start out and do kind of a carpeting area out in the front. This is also a plant that will grow above the water column. So if you took this little amount of plant right here, you could probably, utilize some kind of, holder and actually grow it up above the water, maybe on a hang-on back filter or something like that. I prefer this plant to pothos if that's something that you are going to do. If you're going to grow a plant out of your hang on back filter and try and, reduce nitrates significantly. This plant being from the Amazon, it's coming from a floodplain, so it can handle quite a bit. At certain points in time of the year, it's up in the air. Certain points in time of the year, it's under the water. So it can handle growing under for a really long time without any kind of problems of rotting or anything like that you would see from things like bamboo or pothos if you actually got them fully submerged. So definitely a good option and something I would recommend to almost everybody out there. And the brilliant bright green that you get from this plant once it's been growing underwater is definitely something to be desired, and it's something that I'm always adding to aquariums, and I'm happy to see it whenever I can. Prepping for planting is pretty seamless, you know what I mean? You just got to get all these pots out here, get them ready, and get all your stems separated, and then just get ready to put them in. And then, of course, you got to get yourself some tweezers for sure. Get yourself some of those angle tweezers. Those seem to be the best. They always have never let me down. And people are, of course, going to ask, hey, man, what's the substrate in here? This is a combination of 3 types of substrate. The Fluval stratum is the main. We do have some ADA Amazonia and also some fluorite black sand. Those are the 3 substrates in here mixed together. I think there's 3 bags of fluorite, 1 bag of ADA, and 1 bag of the fluorite black sand. So, nothing too crazy, but I find that little combination works out quite well for the substrate. Getting them planted in, you just want to leave, you just basically want to push the roots down into the substrate, leaving the leaves up above the substrate, allowing them to, photosynthesize in the light, and they will grow up vertically and eventually start sending out some side shoots horizontally, which I've done in the past to just utilize those to propagate from and allow the horizontal shoots to keep growing horizontally. I think I'm done with that. I think I'm going to trim all of the shoots and plant them all vertically and go back to doing things that way. That has worked considerably better in some certain instances in my past, and I think the main downside is that it is a little more labor intensive, but I think it's the right way to go. So I think I'm just going to stick with that and just remember that there's just extra work to do with this little plant, and that's fine. As long as I can keep it on the schedule and go about doing it correctly, I think it's not going to really be that big of an issue. And the big time benefit is that I'm much happier with my scape with this rounded end and this plant in there versus not. So, If you have any questions or comments or complaints or any of that nonsense, throw it down below, and then just sit tight and watch the end of the video, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye. Is it Staurogyne or Staurogyne? Staurogyne? Staurogyne. Staurogyne, Staurogyne. Repens. 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 Is it Staurogyne or Staurogyne? Staurogyne? Staurogyne. 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 Staurogyne? Staurogyne? Staurogyne. It's like Sauron. It's like Sauron and Staurogyne. Staurogyne? Staurogyne Repens. Staurogyne Repens. Staurogyne? Staurogyne? Staurogyne Repens.